Hello everyone. Today we are starting with a new chapter of environment and ecology, and this chapter is biodiversity. Now when we talk about this chapter, first speaking from the point of view of its importance in the examination, you'll find that in prelims and in mains examination it has equal weightage. You have high likeliness of questions coming in the prelims also, and you have a very high likeliness of questions coming in the mains also. And very often you will see that the questions that are coming here are either conceptual in nature or they are based on some species or the other which have been in news. So these are two aspects that you will have to cover. Now, one thing is that this is a big chapter, and this is a chapter which also has a lot of importance, not only from the point of view of your syllabus, but also from the point of view of the earth and the survival of the earth. So you need to understand each and every part of this chapter, each and every aspect of this chapter very thoroughly. So what we'll do is we'll go into the conceptual details of each and every part one by one, and also some of the questions that can come in the examination, both from prelims as well as from mains perspective. So first of all, when we talk about this particular term, biodiversity, if you try to break it down, you will get the meaning of it. The meaning basically will come from these two words, one being bio and the second being diversity. So if you break it down, basically it becomes biological diversity. So we are talking about the biological diversity of the earth. Now, when we talk about biological diversity, we know that there are a lot of ways in which we can define it. So for example, you can talk about diversity in terms of the genetic variability of an organism. You can talk about the different kinds of ecosystems that are present. We have already spoken about the meaning of ecosystem and some of the examples we have seen. So you know that ecosystems can be aquatic, ecosystems can be terrestrial. On land, you have completely different set of organisms. Underwater, you have completely different set of organisms. Not only underwater, even underwater, you can define on the basis of whether it is marine or freshwater ecosystem. So in the marine ecosystem, you have completely different set of organisms. In the freshwater aquatic ecosystem, you have completely different set of organisms. So we know that the variability of organisms is a lot. It can be on the basis of the genetic makeup. It can be on the basis of the different kinds of species. It can be on the basis of different kinds of ecosystems. So there are a lot of ways in which we can define this biological diversity. So then comes into the question, how do we define it? What should be the proper way to define biological diversity or biodiversity? We'll come to that. But first, let me introduce you to the topics that we are going to deal with in this chapter so that you are aware of what exactly and how we are going about it. So first of all, we'll start with a basic introduction to all the chapters or all the topics that we have here. Then we'll look at elements of biodiversity. That is, what is the meaning of species variability? What is the meaning of genetic variability? What is the meaning of ecosystem variability? So all these kind of things we'll have a look at. Then the measurement, how do we measure the biodiversity? The importance of biodiversity, the meaning of hotspots. Often a lot of questions have been asked from here. You'll see that in the previous year papers, hotspot has been one of the hotspots of the question papers. Then you have extinction, a very, very important topic. Loss of biodiversity, how does the loss happen? What is the impact of the loss of biodiversity? Then the conservation of biodiversity, how do we conserve? What are the various ways of conserving the biodiversity? And ultimately, towards the end, we'll have a look at the biogeographical regions of India. How do we divide the various regions in India according to how their ecosystems look? So this is a basic outline of what we are going to do, and each and every topic here on we are going to start with in detail. So first up, with a basic introduction. So as I said, how do we define biodiversity? So if we go by the official definition that was given in the Earth Summit 1992, it was the variability among living organisms from all sources, including inter alia, that is among others, terrestrial, marine and other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes which they are part of. This includes diversity within species, between species, and of ecosystems. So let us break it down first. Let us try to understand what is the meaning of this definition. But before we do that, there comes another question. That is, was this the first time that we started to look at this particular term biodiversity? Or did we know about this term before? So if you go into the history, you will see that there have been a couple of instances where this particular term was introduced into the scientific world. There was a very long time back at around 1915 that there was one paper that was published in the Scientific American that this term was used. But again, this was not a term which was used popularly. It was just one of the scientific terms that came in one of the papers. Then after that, you will see that in 1980s, all of a sudden, this term started to become very popular. For example, in 1980, we see that there was one scientist, Thomas Lovejoy. He was the one who introduced this term. There was a book that he had written, and in this book, he had introduced the term for the first time. And this was 1980. But after that, this term became very significantly important after two of the scientists who were popular in the field of ecology started to use this term. First up, there was Walter Rosen, Edward Wilson, another scientist. And this name, Edward Wilson, is very, very important for you from the point of view of biodiversity. Many people consider him to be the father of biodiversity. Walter Rosen is the person who introduced the term, or rather defined the term biodiversity. And in terms of Walter Rosen, if you talk about the definition that was given by him, he defined the term to be something like this: the richness in variety and variability of species of all living organisms in a given region. And by region, basically, he meant habitat. So this was the definition that was given by Walter Rosen. Now, this was, you can say, for the first time that biodiversity was defined. So when we are looking at this term biodiversity, which is such an often used term today, until 1985, it was actually a topic that was not even discussed. It was a term that was not even defined. So that's why we see that all of a sudden this started to become a popular word, a word that was used by the scientists, especially the ecologists. And then Edward Wilson, the one who made it very popular, the one who is also considered to be the father of biodiversity, he defined this term in a very simple manner. And for him at this point of time, it was all living things living on the planet, all living things that exist on the planet. So this is how he had coined the term biodiversity. But then in 1992, this official definition that we spoke of, this came into account. This was given by the Convention on Biodiversity 1992 during the Earth Summit. So what it says is variability among living organisms from all sources, including terrestrial, marine, other aquatic ecosystems, and the ecological complexes of which they are part. This includes diversity within species. Just remember this: diversity within species, between species, and of the ecosystem. So that's why these three become the levels at which we need to understand biodiversity. These three become the elements of biodiversity. And we'll have a discussion on this as well. But when we talk about this definition, this although is the first time that you can say in a legal manner, there was a definition that was given for biodiversity. But at the same time, even many of the scientists point out that this was not perhaps a complete definition. Because when we talk about this definition, and if you look at the words used closely, it has never been mentioned that something that was living in the past is also a part of the biodiversity. That is, we are not considering any of the fossils to be a part of biodiversity. Anything that existed beforehand is not a part of biodiversity. So this is one part that many scientists say that perhaps it missed out on. Not only this, there are some other criticisms as well. Because when it comes to the convention and the objectives that were defined in the convention, they have some things written there that do not make the scientists and the ecologists very happy. For example, Article 1 of the convention basically talks about fair and equitable sharing of the resources that are coming out of the biodiversity of the earth. Now, when we talk about fair and equitable sharing, this is where there is a problem. That even if we are defining biodiversity, we are actually defining biodiversity on the basis of how we are going to use it. That is, we are considering them as a resource. So this is one problem, that everything is value laden. And because it is value laden, that becomes a very big problem. Because everything is now being looked at at from a commercial level, maybe from the point of view of how they can have an advantage for the humankind. Because when we talk about biodiversity, perhaps we forget that we are also a part of the ecosystem. We are also a part of this biodiversity. We actually consider ourselves to be different from all the other species, whether plants or animals. Humans are being considered separately, which is not correct. So everything being value laden is one problem. The other problem, or the other side of the problem, is philosophical in nature, you can say, where we say that when we talk about this biodiversity, this is something that we can say is a knowledge that we have gained over millions of years. Because if you go back in history, you know that early Earth did not have ozone layer. And since it did not have ozone layer, the life as it exists today could not exist, because obviously a lot of ultraviolet rays used to come to the surface of the earth, and the survival of species was not possible. But then as the ozone layer started to develop, there was an atmosphere that started to develop. Because of this atmosphere, there were conditions that were formed on the earth, because of which we have such a rich diversity of species today. It did not exist. So basically it is something, you can say, a kind of knowledge that has been gained over millions of years. The evolution has happened over millions of years, and all this is basically a kind of library that the humankind is burning today. Today we are actually destroying a lot of species. You know what is happening to our forests. You know that extinctions are happening at a very rapid manner, and these are again all the things that we'll have a discussion upon. But we know that these things are happening. So all these are parts of the problem, also because they haven't been properly, or in the legal documents have not been dealt with. So these are some of the aspects that come into the controversy, some of the aspects that are often seen as criticisms of the definition or the conventions that we have. Now, coming back to the definition, still let's summarize what the definition says. The definition is basically talking about the variability among living organisms from all sources. All sources meaning it can be terrestrial, it can be aquatic. Variability among living organisms. The living organisms can be plants, the living organisms can be animals, it can be microscopic organisms, it can be anything that is existing today on the earth. So we take everything into account while talking about the variability. Then after that, we also talk about the ecological complexes of which they are a part of. Then we are also talking about the diversity within the species, between the species, and of the ecosystems. So there are all these aspects that are included in the definition. So basically we are talking about each and every organism that exists, each and every organism with its variability in its genetic makeup, in its species makeup, everything being included becomes the part of the definition. This is how we define biodiversity and some of the criticisms that have come on its way. As I said, that when we talk about biodiversity, we do not even think of humans being a part of the definition. We think of all the organisms, every plant and animal. We do not think of the humans. We start to think of the humans when something like COVID comes into the picture. And you know that a small microscopic virus, which is not even visible, can be such a disaster for one species. And this species has been human beings this time. So let's not go into that detail, but yes, these are some of the criticisms of the definition and how we look at biodiversity.